For a little while, I've been wanting to do a episode on the dealerships that we had in Brisbane for Holden, Ford and Valiant, as well as the Holden factory. So this episode, I take you around and I show you the different places. I've made a little map to give people a bit of an idea about how they were geographically spread around Brisbane. And there's some photos at the end of dealerships and also the cars and the selling techniques of the time. So anyway, have a look, hope you enjoy, and strap yourself in for Jive Talking Garage. G'day subscribers, today we're going to talk about the big three: Holden, Ford and Valiant. You're with Jules Knight on Jive Talking Garage. So I'm a baby of the 60s. So I pretty much grew up in an era where Holden had become 48% of the car market, really revolutionised the automotive industry in Australia. But they really had it to themselves until the start of the 60s, I suppose. Ford brought out their North American Falcon and Chrysler started producing the Valiant. Now, around Brisbane we had dealerships, had suburban dealerships. There was three in town: Austral Motors for Chrysler, Metropolitan Motors for Ford, Metro Ford, and Eagers for Holden. My car came from Eagers. Now, I can actually remember, as a kid, my dad bringing me, when he bought his last Valiant, to the showroom floor and showed me his car. So let's go and have a look at the place. So at the moment we're in the central business district of Brisbane, so we're at the top end of town, the top end of Queen Street, and you run into this building, which is now All Hallows School, because All Hallows School is behind, so they've bought this building. But I can remember in the 70s, and it was most probably before it as well, this was Austral Motors. Now my old boy would either buy a Valiant from Foremost Motors or Austral Motors, and he had a good friend, Ron, whom he met at Austral Motors. But this was where the dealership was. Now I can remember so this has got to be, main entrance to walk into the dealership and so on. But I can remember being brought exactly here as a probably 13-year-old kid, and my dad's car was in that window. So this was a Sunday morning. He brought me here on a Sunday morning, and because he'd actually bought a taxi pack, he was saying to me that they'd phoned him on the Friday to come and get the car with a dealer's plate. Now, dealer's plate means you can drive any car, and he had to take the car off the showroom floor that was there. He had to take it off the showroom floor, and he had to take it up to transport department for them to inspect the taxi, because it was a taxi pack. And the taxi pack in those days meant that it came delivered with a standard fiberglass front across the dash that a radio and a taximeter could be inserted into, and in the boot was the actual factory dash of a normal car. But this was the dealership experience. So you had one here at the very bottom of town, and if we go up the street and you can see where that creamy building is there, that was where Metro Ford was. Now that was a site owned by Ford Australia, and I don't know what the arrangement was between them and Metro. I've got a friend that worked there for 40 years, but that was where Metro Ford is, and it shows you how close everyone was in proximity to the CBD. so they could capture Brisbane customers. So we've had a look at the locations of the CBD dealers for Valiant, Ford and Holden. But I also wanted to make mention of what happened then that doesn't happen now. And I'm a child of the 60s. And I can remember as a little boy, we lived at West End, so that's just near town, probably about 3-4 k's from town. And we had another block of land at Mount Gravatt. And so my dad would drive out to Mount Gravatt to mow the grass at the block of land, and I'd obviously go with him, and I would go past at least 2 Holden dealers, one Handysides at Green Slopes, near Stones Corner, and the other was Zups. It was at Mount Gravatt. Now, what I noticed is whenever there was a new model coming out, whether it be probably, in my way of thinking, HK, HT, HG, and also HQ, they would paint all of the windows just with water-based colour. You know, they'd get a sign writer out, and there would be sign writing written on new model coming, or run out sale, or superseded model cheap, or whatever. And then what that did was it created interest by having the new model inside, which might be an entirely different shape, which is really odd seeing. You sort of get used to seeing one body shape, but then all of a sudden there's a new body shape and you think, oh, that doesn't look right. But really over time it does look right. But I certainly can remember that happening at Zups and Handysides, and I would suspect it was at a lot of any other dealerships in and around Brisbane. So what I've done is I've printed out a little bit of a map to show everybody, and I've just written on there with some icons where I sort of can remember everything was. Okay, so we've got a map of Brisbane. Now, this is pretty much, I would suggest, what happened everywhere, but what I've done is I've labelled where you see red, that's General Motors, the blue oval's Ford, and the black colour with the Pentastar, that's Valiant. So I can only really remember Valiant here at Austral Motors, and also Foremost Motors here at Wynnum. Whereas I've talked about Handysides and Zups, and obviously Eagers, but there was another little one around the corner, Harrison's, and also Leach Motors nearby. At Wollongabba, there ended up later on being Barton's, and Sivia Holden's out here at Maruka. But then at Capalaba, there was Oldfields. Now, here we are at Carindale. So, we moved out from West End to Mount Gravatt in 1970. New Year's 1970, so January for 1970. And at that end, Camp Hill and Carindale, that was pretty much from there, that was the end of the world for Brisbane. And then you had this little patch of people here in Wynnum and Manly, and then these little pocket of Redlanders here from Capalaba onwards. So here, nothing. It's to this day, these are all pretty much big blocks anyway. But I've talked about the two main Valiant dealers. I would suggest that Holden's most probably had the biggest selection with all of the red, and we've got Metropolitan Motors up here at Spring Hill, and their other site here they end up turning to buying later on at Southside. And then at Chermside up here there was another one with Betty Burnford that ended up going there, so that's just another one from memory. But you can see those, and there was in the end another dealership out of Indooroopilly as well for Skyfleet,
I had a Ford sent from there to Southside because it was the very last one of the colour that my wife liked, as in the last one that they ever painted of that colour. So there was only one left in stock. But that gives you a bit of an idea of, how dealerships were laid out. But you can see a really big advantage to, Holden before they sort of really branched out into the 80s. And I think on the way out to Ipswich at Oxley as well, there ended up being one for a short period of time in the 80s. But dealerships wise, certainly Holden, they were licensed to print money to start with, but toward the end of Holden's life in Australia, it was a really hard road to hoe. So
of the CBD at Spring Hill, and where we are is St Paul's Terrace. Now this is the site that was owned by Ford Australia, and it overlooks the Brisbane CBD. So Ford owned the land, and this is where Metro Ford was. So you can see how far the new buildings are here. Well, this is when Ford got Metro Ford to leave, Metropolitan Motors. So they were here, used to drive in and go down to the paint shop here and the spare parts. But all through here, you can see this was a ground level, and that's where all the showroom was, where you'd go to look at the new Fords, the new Falcon and Fairlane and so on. So I've been out here many times on a night to do window shopping and whatever, and to see what cars were available or what was coming out when they brought out the XE and XF Falcons. I'd come and have a look at the windows here and see what the engine and gearbox combinations were. But as you can see, really it's a busy place, a lot of thoroughfare, so they've got a lot of passing traffic. But I've been a customer here. I got Tracy's last Fairmont here. We bought that brand new from David Fellows, and that was just here at Metro Ford. So here we are in Wickham Street at Brisbane, and this is where the General Motors Holden's factory was in Fortitude Valley. So Wickham Street's probably about, 2 kilometres from the CBD, if that. But all of the locations that we've seen, whether it be Metro Ford or where Holden's was here, they were 534. This is 540, but it takes up the whole block. All of the locations are on busy roads. That's not a bad thing. So cars were assembled here, but down the end of the street here is where the light rail is, and that's where bodies were brought in from Acacia Ridge. So Mr. O'Brien told me that, Ray O'Brien, and because we were talking over a Chinese meal at Marie's, and because he's Marie's father, and he started talking about Eagers. So I just said to him, "Oh, my FJ came from Eagers," and then he said, "Oh yeah, well that would have been unloaded at the end of Wickham Street, and then brought up here and been assembled in the Holden factory." And I said, "Oh, how do you know that?" And Mr. O'Brien said to me, "Well, I used to unload them because I worked for Holden's in those days." So I thought it's really important to talk to old timers. So if this is where Holden was here in Brisbane, where they did all their assembly, so down the end here, and less than, I'll say, a kilometre, that's where Eagers were. So Eagers are now a Ford dealer on the site, but I'll take you to show you where that site was. So here we are, just a little bit down the road from Wickham Street, and we got Breakfast Creek just down there, where Captain Cook and Sir Joseph Banks had breakfast. And this is where Eagers Holden was. Now they've got a Ford dealership now, but this is where the Holden part was. So service is behind. That's where you put your car in for service. And then where that green building is there, that was pretty much where they had the spare parts. So you'd go there and you would buy spare parts. But as you can see, pretty much from the locations that we've looked at, they've all been on main roads. They've all had really good foot traffic, and what they're relying on is people seeing the cars that are available and buying them. So, it's not just radio and the printed media to actually get the news out, because don't forget, television didn't come into Australia till 1956, 57 and so on, and then made its way up the coast. So you didn't have those uses for media and advertising, so you were relying on radio, newspapers and magazines. But that's how they sold in those days. Plus also, not only that, but going past the dealership and seeing the excitement that was in there with new models or really good displays or other cars on the road or friends' cars. So that's really how things were bought back in the day. So this is where my FJ, my Ute, on the 29th of April 1954 came from. So it was made just down the road and then shipped to Eagers. Now, people in the country could have their car driven to them for a fee. Like, for instance, at Warwick, my friend Mark, his car was driven to the original owner's place. Well, no, that's not quite true. The original owners drove down here or caught a train down here to get it, rather than it be driven to their place at Warwick and delivered. But that was how things could be done in those days. They were either driven there or delivered. But that gives you a little bit of a hit as far as info on dealerships in Brisbane in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and also the Holden factory. I haven't touched on the Ford factory because I don't think too many of my viewers will be interested in Eagle Farm and the Ford factory over there. But so I've given you a look at Eagers, at Southside Coachcraft Ford, at Metro Ford, at Eagers here at Newstead. We've talked about Barton's and Oldfield and Zups at Mount Gravatt and Aspley and Sivia Holden and all those other places. So anyway, look, that's our episode for dealerships and the factory in Brisbane. Hope you've enjoyed. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, but more importantly, enjoy your Holden.